And remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Alderman Matthews.
Here.
Alderman Sage.
Here.
Alderman Malumboy.
Here.
Alderman Burgess.
Here.
Alderman Painter.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Schmidt.
Here.
Alderman Black.
Here.
Alderman Hallman.
Here.
Alderman Bray.
Here.
Mayor Renner.
Before we get underway, for those who may not have heard, our mayor has decided to take a temporary leave of absence to attend to some medical issues, and we're expecting to see him back here very soon, and we wish him all the best. First is recognitions and appointments, and I don't know if John Weber is here. He's being reappointed to the Building Board of Appeals. You're here? We thank him for his service. We turn to public comment now. The public comment is for a period up to 30 minutes. I believe I counted 11 names, and I'm going to call them three at a time. You have 3 minutes, up to 3 minutes to speak. And I know several of you are here to speak about the Downtown Bloomington Association and its potential move to the city. So to expedite that, if you could keep your comments to new information and supporting information, I appreciate that. Thank you. In this order, Ruth Haney, Tim Tilton, and Gary Lambert. So if we could start with Ruth.
Thank you. My name is Ruth Haney, and I am the current president of the Board of Directors for the Downtown Bloomington Association. And I want to state the board is in full support of recommending that the DBA office, along with the staff, become a part of the Community Development Department of the city. Our board consists of members from retailers, property owners, business owners, and people that live and work in the downtown. Many of us feel passionate about what the downtown has to offer, and we have worked tirelessly to make it into the great place that it is now. Unfortunately, in 2011, the funding assistance from the City of Bloomington to help the DBA carry out its mission dropped from $195,000 to $90,000 annually. This $90,000 a year does not go far when the salaries, insurance, rent, and utilities are coming out of that amount. We have found this budget has made programs difficult and limited to carry out our goals. Money for the events, marketing costs, artwork, and beautification all comes from membership dues, fundraisers, and private sponsorship. Members of the board and others have donated not only money, but thousands of hours of volunteer work. And it has made it a better place to live, work, and play in the downtown. The DBA has been a great asset for the city, and it has made a huge impact on what you see and what is happening in our downtown. It not only promotes the revitalization of the downtown, but also hosts many events in the downtown, and to list only a few, they coordinate the Adopt a Pot and the Planner programs, the public art projects, and they host one of the largest markets in the downtown, farmers markets in downstate Illinois. The DBA office markets the downtown by managing an active DBA website, a Facebook page, Twitter, and by emailing out weekly events calendar. The website not only notifies people of events, but also helps fill vacant commercial and residential properties by advertising for the property owners. In 2010, the City Council unanimously adopted the city's strategic plan, and one of its key goals was to have a prosperous downtown. My hope is that the DBA board will be able to continue to be a partner with the city and act as an advisory board so that we continue to have a voice in moving our downtown forward so that we can reach our shared goal for our downtown. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Tilton, Gary Lambert, and then Glenn Ludwig.
Good evening. Tim Tilton, 200 West Monroe. My wife and I are residents, business owners on multiple businesses, and property owners in the downtown. I'm also a board member of the DBA. I want to applaud the city staff and you on the council for your forward thinking in regard to the DBA and all that it has accomplished up to this point. And also acknowledge that this has been a very successful model, the one that is being presented for our DBA to be brought into the fold of the city. Similar sized cities in their revitalization have been very successful, and I would note Carmel, Indiana, Naperville, Illinois, East Peoria, Decatur, Illinois, Big Rapids, Michigan, and even our neighbors to the north. We recognize many of the strengths of our downtown. The history and its people, its rich architecture, the Lincoln Connection, Route 66, all of our artists, over 28 the last time I counted, and it being an arts center with the visual and performing arts center. It's an entertainment venue. Dining, nightlife is well known and appreciated by all. Music and visual arts, again at the BCPA. There's a great deal of high-end and ever-growing residential apartments, condos, and homes in the downtown area. We're a government center and a center for preservation of our whole community. We're linked to our shared heritage through the Museum of History and all of the things that they do. We're a job incubator and business incubator to a very large extent. Our facility has been an incubator for at least a dozen of very, very successful businesses that have grown to be a part of our community. They've actually left us because they outgrew our facility. Progressive cities across the nation have realized the positive economic and cultural value of their downtowns. This is the next step in reaching the goals that we all have of a healthy, vibrant, and growing part of our community.
I'm going to need you to wrap up.
At its core. Thank you.
Thank you. Gary Lambert, Glenn Ludwig, and then Scott Steimling.
Good evening. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Alderman Sage for his comments last week regarding priorities. I've sat in on a number of planning sessions by this group regarding priorities. It seems like, well, let me back up a little bit. A few years ago, 2 or 3, we went out and did the online survey, and we had the citizens group. And it came through very consistent. The priorities are fire, police, and infrastructure. Everything else was far behind. Last week we talked about priority-based budgeting. From my perspective, when I see that says we're getting ready to spend a bunch of money and we're going to need new taxes or new fees to fund the true priorities. I think it shifted into high gear roughly 4 years ago. when the city, this council, reneged on their commitment to fund road improvements with $4 million a year from the general fund. And I'm sure you don't remember it, Alderman Schmidt, but you happen to be sitting in for the mayor at his Friday meeting, on the next meeting after that. And the comment I made to you at that time was, what you have just done is created a $4 million slush fund to use for pet projects. And I think that continues to this day. Different topic. Here's a printout of a WJBC interview from the mayor. Says, small but nasty group seeks to sabotage his agenda. I suppose then that means everyone who disagrees with the governor's agenda likewise is nasty. Those who disagree with the president's agenda are likewise nasty. According to the Panagraph article this afternoon, make sure I get this, no alderman has asked for a rebuke. After the previous occurrence, I would have hoped that would have occurred. Thank you.
Thank you. Glenn Ludwig and Scott Steimling and Joe Haney.
Good evening and thank you. Glenn Ludwig. I live at 23 Astoria Way. I, after your last meeting a week ago, communicated to the alderman that via email that I thought that you had a kind of a nice turnaround meeting. At least it was the best meeting I think you've had in this year. And the reason I was positive is I heard you using some words I've been pleading for you to consider, things like collaboration, cooperation, those types of things that seem to be kind of hard to talk about, at least recently within on both sides of Division Street. Let me just put it that way. So I was feeling pretty good about that. And I still am. I'm still optimistic. I'm probably too optimistic. But I would really hope that there'd be some follow-through. My speaker ahead of me, I respect, and I know that it's difficult to make priority-based budgeting work. But I'm hoping that you're going to take another stab at it, and that you'll stick with it. I think you've got some real motivations. If you look at what's going on in Illinois, and what's going on in the United States, it's time we start doing some priority type thinking. And I'm hoping that you'll do that. I'm really optimistic that you'll do that. I'll help in any way I can. In closing, and I'm going to make this quick, 5 months ago, Jim Fruin, a very highly respected alderman here in Bloomington, and another highly committed and equally talented member of the town council across Division Street, wrote and distributed a document titled Principles of Partnership. To my knowledge, I don't know if that ever really got on the table on either town or city council for discussion. I hope it would get some attention. I think the time is right. I think that there's tremendous opportunities to save dollars, significant dollars, millions of dollars, if we can get down to some real careful and serious thinking about collaboration within this region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Scott Steimling, Joe Haney, and Joe Walden.
Scott Steimling, Ward 5. My concern is the streets in this town are going to pot. 10 years ago, I brought it to the city's attention. There were 3 storm drains, one right out in front of my house, and the other 2 were across the street. And you were having to lift the storm drain out so you could clean underneath it so your house didn't flood. And they came out, asphalted those in to the street, and they said, we will be out in the spring, and I assumed the spring of the next year. And I'm still waiting. The sidewalk, that just was replaced the other day because the city came out and they found it was a tripping hazard. And, I guess it makes me wonder, how much does this city actually waste? In expenses that they don't have to use. What, as Gary said, what happened to the police, the fire, and the streets? Or are we going to have to raise taxes again? Which is one of Mayor Renner's tactics, is to raise taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe Haney, Joe Walden, Martha Burke.
Thank you, Council. This is Joe Haney. I'm a property owner and investor in downtown Bloomington, member of DBA. And the proposal we have on the table right now, I think, is very important to us to be able to actually survive. There may be ways to shore it up and make it work, but we are at the point we are in trouble. And for what we do for downtown Bloomington, as far as promoting events and so on, we put in numerous volunteer hours. Many of our folks do that to get things to happen downtown, to try to draw people in, be a part. We've had an issue in Bloomington bringing people out from the outer perimeter and so on. They don't think downtown is safe. That's one of the things the task force is working on and looking at, and how to handle the problems we have, and I'm a part of that. I don't know, I agree with Chairman Black. The thing is, Bloomington is a gem, and people don't realize it, and this is what we need to shore it up and pull us together. We can't keep going on as it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe Walden, Martha Burke, and Denise Geske.
Joe Walden, Ward 5. I want to take you back 2 weeks to the 11th hour commentary about the requesting of electrical supply to the city of Bloomington. At the insistence of Councilman Black and Ms. Bergeris, it was voted to only seek requests for proposal from those utilities who would supply only green energy. I think that's a mistake, and I would make the appeal to the council to go back and revisit that and bring it forth for a vote. I will refer initially to a Friday, August 25th section of money in the pantograph, which says, the Department of Energy said Wednesday the government should make it easier and cheaper to operate power plants, including coal and nuclear, to strengthen the nation's electric grid. The department said in a new report that the closure of many plants that once formed the backbone of the grid has raised the risk that consumers might not have reliable electricity. And I think that's what we're talking about. I didn't feel that the individual who presented that was entirely accurate, and Ms. Painter, I don't feel that those numbers that he gave were entirely that close, as you said, to be insignificant. So I went back, did some research, and of course we used Google, why not, and try to use as many as we can. I found that electricity from new solar is nearly 5 times more expensive than from existing nuclear and 3.5 times more expensive than from existing coal. Electricity from new wind is over 3.5 times more expensive than from existing nuclear and over 2.5 times more expensive than from existing coal. Wind and solar are called intermittent power sources. Basically, they're dependent on whether the sun shines or the wind blows. Coal, fossil, and nuclear are called operator-controlled, and they provide a reliable, sustainable contribution to the electric grid, something that wind and solar cannot do without the aid of either massive acres of solar panels or wind machines. And there are not enough batteries in the country to provide the backup power that this country and even this city might need in times of crisis. In 2014, coal met 92% of the electric needs across the country. Now you cannot replace 92% of the coal, of that need in just solar and wind. It cannot be done. Europe has found this to be a failing too, because what they have found, and this comes from a European study, is that they are mistaking a labor-intensive energy sector rather than efficiency. They double-counted jobs and oversimplified the labor market. They found out that the question was asked, how much government support of green markets is enough? The government was picking winners and losers, and that's something you did last week. You picked winners and losers. Free market capitalism is what we're about, not picking winners and losers. There's more, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. I'm sorry I can't stay tonight, but you have my phone number. Alderman Painter, you know where I live.
Thank you. Martha Burke, Denise Guskey, Vicki Tilton.
Hi, I'm Martha Burke. I'm on the DBA board, and I'm also chair of the design committee of the DBA. Well, in 2008, my friend Joanne Getzinger and I opened a gallery, an art gallery in downtown Bloomington, the first gallery to show regularly the multiple works of many different artists. And there are now 3 galleries like that following our pattern. I don't think either one of us would have wanted to open a business in downtown without the DBA and the support of Tricia Stiller. I don't think we would have had the courage to do that. We owned it for 5 years, and by the time we sold it, I was already in the DBA and chairing a committee, and I was too involved to leave. So I've remained an enthusiastic supporter of downtown. I love downtown. And I think right now we're kind of on a cusp of things are looking really good. The design committee does the artwork and the flowers and the holiday decorations, and we've gone from being a city that looked like, what's a neat place somebody ought to do something with, to something that somebody loves and people are really working on. And lots and lots of volunteer hours have gone into that. I think right now is the time that we really need to push forward and keep going with this. And having a development office in downtown would really, really help, and help all of the people who've been volunteering their time for this for so long. And I think it's important to note that there aren't any thriving cities who have let their downtowns rot. You can't just let it go. Downtowns are more important than that. And anybody who's going to move to downtown to Bloomington or set up a business in Bloomington, if they drove down Main Street and turned off to downtown and saw what it looked like 20 years ago, I think they'd probably run the other way. If they come now and look, they're going to say, oh, this is a thriving downtown. We want to be part of this. So I think this is really an important development, something we really need to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Denise Guskey, Vicki Tilton, and Jan Lancaster.
Excuse me, Denise Geske. I live at 616 South Clinton Street in Bloomington. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity, although I'm a nervous wreck. This is not my comfort zone. So this will not be formal or fancy, probably not near as well-spoken as those who have talked before me, but I just jotted down some thoughts. I am in support of the Downtown Bloomington Association and the partnership with the city. The DBA is very helpful in organizing partnerships for business owners in the area of marketing, advertising, and special events. That's what I do for our family business. And having Tricia advocate and work on our behalf to be able to have cooperative advertising, for example, we're then putting money into the pantograph and the radio stations and the other areas there that does help, but I wouldn't be able to do that without them advocating on our behalf to get lower prices and things like that. we're stronger together. This creates better visibility in the state and truly the country in terms of tourism, because it's obvious that what the DBA has been doing in partnerships with the museum and the 66 and the BCPA and all of those things, they're not only impacting the downtown though, they're impacting the city as a whole. And people, the feeling that I get, they want to separate it. It's a us against them, and it shouldn't be that way, and it doesn't have to be that way. And I feel like the money that comes into the community because of the efforts of Tricia and the DBA, it does impact the entire city, and I would like that to be taken into consideration. Tricia, in the role as the DBA leader, she's obviously passionate about our community. She dedicates a tremendous amount of time, energy, heart, and soul into strengthening our city core, and I think that should be appreciated and applauded and recognized. I would hate to see the DBA close, and it seems like we might be on the verge of that. Leadership is critical, but often unappreciated. We're fortunate to have the leadership we do in the DBA office, but also in the City Council, and I thank you for that. Every community has naysayers. Whatever the civic or community leaders propose to do, some people will always say things like, you can't do it, it won't work, it costs too much, or we tried that already. And no is a very powerful word in a small community, but leaders of successful communities know that yes is an even more powerful word. Yes can make our city a better place to live in, to look at, to work in, and to visit. A pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. Thank you for your time and service to our city.
Thank you. Vicki Tilton and Jan Lancaster.
Good evening. Vicki Tilton, 200 West Monroe. I am a lifelong resident of the Bloomington Normal community. 40 to 50 years ago, I watched the exodus from downtown and the neighboring residential areas. The heart of our city and many others were left to deteriorate while we watched the sprawl that was occurring on the edges of our cities and towns. Over 20 years ago, my husband and I believed it was time to revive our city center, and we invested all that we have in our building at 200 West Monroe and other development projects downtown. Not just financially, but emotionally as well. We brought our home, our families, our businesses downtown. We've grown Fox and Hounds to nearly 50 employees. We've created 3 floors of offices and 9 additional residential living spaces in our building. We believe that a renaissance was about to happen in Bloomington, as was happening throughout many cities in the United States. Well, we've watched the extremely slow progress over those 20 years. Many property owners that held on to their beautiful, architecturally historic buildings have continued to believe, as we do, that it's now time for the revival to flourish. There has been only one serious flaw holding us back downtown over the years. That has been the lack of vision and the lack of support by city leaders. I believe we've now overcome that with a mayor and a city council that understands when you let the heart of a city languish, the whole city will suffer. Our downtown is the heart of the community, so I would ask you, why would you not include it in the Community Development Division? I would encourage you this evening to transition the DBA and its current leadership with their list of successes into the Community Development Division of our city government. This will show that the confidence that you have in the heart of this city and the office that has been the driving force behind it in the past. It will also say to the citizens, we believe we have a great community with much to offer. We can economically be stronger by supporting further development and redevelopment in the downtown. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Jan Lancaster.
Hi, Jan Lancaster. I live at 316 North Main, downtown. Thanks for letting me address you tonight. Since my teen years, which is a very long time ago, downtown was the place to be. When I had the opportunity to open a business in downtown, I jumped at the chance. As most of you know, I have owned the bistro for almost 25 years, and I also owned a little restaurant called Lancaster's for 16 years. Along with many people in this room, I have been involved in almost every downtown task force and organization that is now known as the Downtown Bloomington Association. I consider Tricia Stiller a Wonder Woman for accomplishing as much as she has on such a shoestring budget. Our farmers market is rated one of the top in the state of Illinois. With the help of Catherine Dunlap, it continues to grow. We have established First Fridays, which brings hundreds of people to our downtown and highlights our artists and businesses. Notice our beautiful murals and now our traffic control boxes that are getting some press. These are just a few of the many things the Downtown Bloomington Association is responsible for. This was all done, again, on a very limited budget. We now have the opportunity to add the Downtown Bloomington Association under the city's umbrella, which is only going to be a win-win. Without your support tonight, the DBA will end. Many of our existing programs and events will also end. Please don't allow this to happen. Thanks.
Thank you. We now move to the consent agenda, and items that are on the consent agenda are considered to be routine in nature. Are there any items that anyone wants to pull or a motion to approve?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Motion by Alderman Howman, second.
Second.
Second by Alderman Painter. All right, no conversation. Okay, let's see if I can remember how to work this. Okay. And I need... Really? Yay, okay. It takes a village, right? There are no nays to announce. All right, okay. We move to the regular agenda. The first item on the regular agenda is with regard to the Coliseum sidewalk and ramp modifications.
Can you go ahead and bring up that first slide? Thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem. It's nice to be up in front of you again. This time we're going to be talking about the Grossinger Motors Arena, and I want to introduce Russ Waller to give us some details of this. Before I do, I want to preface it by saying two things. First of all, you see on the sign it says U.S. Coliseum on the picture, even though it's Grossinger Motors Arena. And throughout these documents, it was referred to a lot of times as the U.S. Cellular Coliseum. We know it's the Grossinger Motors Arena, but many of these documents begin before the changeover, and since they were already in the place of being negotiated, those names appear here. But for our purposes, that is incidental because it still refers to the same place. Secondly, what we're talking about today is going to be the sidewalk and ramp modifications, but the city manager and I also asked Russ to mention some of the things that we have done already and some of the things that we have yet to do to conform to the Attorney General's requirements that we make this ADA compliant. So we'll be talking about the sidewalk and ramp modifications, but we'll mention a couple of the other things that have been done and are yet to be done. Also, there's two pieces to this. There's the sidewalk modification, but then there is also to it an alternative to add in bollards for safety because of the accident-prone nature of this area, which is an option that the council can adopt. And I'm going to ask Russ Waller then to come up and walk us through those procedures for your consideration. Thank you. Russ?
Well, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council. I probably can just sit down after that opening. I pretty much went through most of my presentation, but I will go through it and maybe hit a little more detail than Assistant City Manager Rasmussen said. So one thing he did mention is throughout this presentation you will see the Coliseum mentioned and pictures of it. And hopefully I'll refer to it as the arena, but I still catch myself still calling it the Coliseum. So there we go. Oops, I jumped a slide. So yeah, tonight's main emphasis is for the arena, the sidewalk and ramp improvements. And just a quick overview there is basically this shows the areas of the sidewalks that are non-compliant and the ADA ramp on the north side that we'll be talking about a little later. But I did want to spend this time now to kind of go over work that's been completed and then a little bit of work that we still have yet to do. So work, I'm not going over everything, I'm just going to hit the highlights. So a lot of the work that we've done has been interior to the locker rooms. A lot of the locker rooms did not have any ADA compliant benches. Anything that you do for a able-bodied person, you also have to provide for someone that is disadvantaged. So as you see in the pictures, basically the home team locker room has the cubby holes, or cubbies we like to call them. All of those are for able-bodied persons. We did have to build one for ADA standards. The guest locker rooms, same thing. The benches that were there to the left, the pre-construction shows what was existing, and there was an attempt to provide some ADA compliant with the wider bench there on the left, but that did not meet the requirements. What you see on the post-construction is what actually meets the requirements. You have to have a shelf similar to what's provided for the able-bodied person, and as well as a clear zone, which clearly identified there for a wheelchair to fit in, so they can back in. We also did a lot of work in the showers. So here you're looking at a single shower room. The pre-construction just shows the push button with a shower head, not ADA compliant. You needed to provide a movable shower so someone in a wheelchair could pull the shower head down. You also had to install the grab bars. We also have multi-person shower rooms over there. The pre-construction photo shows one of the showers with, I think it's a 6-unit shower. The conversion there to make it ADA compliant is we had to provide some separation. There's handrails added, and then kind of somewhat visible at the top of the photo, but it also does have that ADA compliant shower head. So that was the what's been completed. Now for future is the elevator that we've hired a consultant to design for us. This is essentially showing the general location of where it will be located. The upper right shows a sign that says ADA entry. The proposed elevator will be installed right next to those set of doorways. We do have this is an existing photo. This is a mock of what the proposed change would look like. So what you see is the elevator shaft. It's a little wider at the bottom because we're using this opportunity to provide some additional storage that VenueWorks has indicated they're in desperate need of. And so the set of doors you'll see there in the photo or the exhibit is for that storage. The actual elevator is the 2-story elevator that would basically take patrons from the event level to the concourse level. And the access will be from the inside of the Coliseum. You don't have to go outside to get to the elevator. You come down the 8A hallway. They will build another little hallway in the existing locker room to get to the elevators. Everything will take place inside. It's just an exterior construction. So here's a summary of kind of the costs we spent to date. Some of this work was, a considerable portion of the work was performed in-house by facility staff, about $31,000, basically just in materials. We don't have labor included in that. The external work would be, includes the showers. The ADA showers were done. We had to hire a plumber for that work. It also includes the design costs for the elevator and for the sidewalk repairs that we're going to talk a little bit later on. And it includes the modifications that we're proposing tonight for the sidewalk actual construction. So grand total to date, about $351,000. And then the estimated future cost is essentially for the elevator about $450,000 is what our design consultant has given us to date. So now moving back to the sidewalk and ramp modifications. Same picture I showed you before. I just wanted to pay particular attention to the sidewalk along Madison Street. Not all of that sidewalk has to be replaced, but a substantial portion does. That was not known when we did the budgeting for this work. We had some general idea, but until we actually hired the consultant, had them do all the survey work and give us the actual extent, we weren't quite sure. So some of that is not have to be removed and replaced, but a substantial portion does. So this gives you a few photos essentially of the areas. The upper left photo is essentially right in front of the Coliseum or the arena along Madison Street. The upper right is the it's not a ramp, it's more of just a sidewalk that goes along the south side of the arena. And then also in that same picture, you'll see the smoking area just on the back side of the arena that is also non-compliant. And then the bottom photo is the actual ADA ramp on the north side of the building. That is not compliant either. So after we discovered that a substantial portion of the sidewalk along Madison Street needed to be removed, we looked at this opportunity as a potential to provide some safety improvements that we think are appropriate. And that's what was included in tonight's bid, or the bid that went out, that I'll be discussing. So this gives you an idea of the number of people that gather along Madison Street to enter an event. Just multiple pictures of the same thing. They often put up the barriers, type 1 barriers to keep people from dropping off patrons, which still occurs but despite the barriers. And so I think a lot of that is why the accidents occur. Just a little bit of the, I'll move on to the next one. So here's a conceptual draft plan of what the barriers that we're proposing that were included in the bid. Essentially, they're stainless steel bollards that are spaced about 5 foot apart, and intermittent, not really intermittent, but a stand, like every fifth one will be a lighted bollard, just be able to see it, and it gives a little more aesthetic. So the reason we looked at that is we did go back and look at the accident history that's been there. And let me get to my right page to give you the right numbers. It is included in your packet. So in the past 10 years that the arena's been open, there's been 91 accidents between Front and Olive Street. So in that block where the arena sits, there's been 91 accidents. 16 were right in front of the arena. And of those 16, most of them were rear end hits, essentially, because people dropping off. The data doesn't actually show why the accident occurred, but our suspicion, based on just watching the activity that occurs there, is that people are dropping off patrons, stopping to do that, or pick up patrons. The one thing that I do want to point out is that 3 of those accidents were actually off right-of-way object hits. And we have firsthand knowledge of one of those. It's not shown in the picture, but there's a sign toward the south end of the arena. We had to replace it a couple years ago because it was actually taken out by a car. I've also talked to VenueWorks, and they've said that some of the prior staff, or existing staff that were there when it was managed by the prior company, said a lot of the planters that are along there have been hit on occasion. So there is some history of some accidents. Thank goodness no one's been injured, but we thought this was a definite opportunity to be able to add some safety improvements. So the last slide here essentially is a summary of the costs. The actual ADA required improvements that need to be done are $113,275. The alternates that were bid is we bid a M50 rated bollards, which essentially that's a 50 mile an hour rating. So a car traveling at 50 mile an hour will be stopped by those bollards. And then we also bid the M30 rating. They're pretty pricey, as you can see. The M50 is what we're recommending. The speed limit in that area is 30 mile an hour, but we're also looking at someone intent on doing harm wouldn't be driving the speed limit. So we're recommending the M50 rating be installed. The additional cost for that is $458,600. So the total project for base bid alternate 1A would be $571,875. The budget that we had included was only $250,000, because when we prepared that, we had no idea the extent of the sidewalk that would be required to be removed and replaced. We thought that would definitely cover it. As you can see, it did cover the sidewalk work. However, it did not cover the safety improvements. So we're still recommending that with a budget amendment to take care of the safety need and use the opportunity that we have in front of us for the sidewalk that will be removed to provide some additional safety and some aesthetic enhancements. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Waller. Are there questions or a motion? Either? Alderman Black.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I think you've really highlighted just some of the needs that are over there, and safety is always of the utmost importance for this council. So I'd like to make a motion that we approve as presented.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Alderman Mwambwe. Is there any additional conversation? Go ahead and vote.
Approve what? We've got multiple bids up there. I'm just curious what we're talking about right now here, Scott.
Can you clarify your motion, Scott?
Yeah, it would be the M50 rating That's what I'm looking at.
Okay. Thank you. 9-0, no nays to announce. Thank you. Now we move to item 8B, which is the vote on the conversation that we had during our work session regarding the approval of establishing the Downtown Development Division. And don't know how much more conversation we need on this, but I'll let you make some introductory remarks. And once again, I want to explain to people that we have Alderman Matthey and Alderman Painter recusing themselves. Alderman Matthey is on the DBA board. Alderman Painter is involved with the Illinois Prairie Community Foundation. So anyway, thank you.
I was going to say, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, with your permission, I'll avoid giving the presentation again then.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And I'm just
appreciate
available
that.
to answer any other questions that may have come up.
Do we have questions, or can we have a motion to put this into play? We'll start with Alderman Malomboy.
Oh, okay. Just a couple of quick questions. Earlier, when you spoke about this project, you mentioned that the staff would be taking care of homelessness, right? The homeless issue?
Yes, what I said was there are a number of projects that we would like to take on, and one of the things that we have been working with a volunteer task force in the city was the subject of homelessness. We have not got anybody in the staff who has been assigned that project, but this is one of the things that we give to the DDD to work on that as one of their things on their to-do list.
Could you talk to me about some of the things that they would do then as part of this project?
Well, yes. What happens is, as a part of our discussions, we recognize that there are people that have a right to be on the street, but also there are problems with businesses and with families that shop downtown. And so what we would like to do is kind of limit that a little and try to remove some of the more offensive aspects of that. And so there are some things that we have been working on. For example, one suggestion has been made that we work towards perhaps making public restrooms downtown so homeless people are not trying to go into businesses to use the restrooms. Another thing that we have talked about is providing more information to homeless people about the services that are provided by different places on town. We've had a lot of trouble with homeless people taking possession of some of our benches. All of these things are issues that can be worked to try to make it fair and legal for everyone, to try to help the people who are perhaps down on their luck, but also to provide some facilities that might make the downtown have an appearance of more cleanliness and safety for people who visit our downtown. And one of the things we would do is I would assign that specifically as a task for the DDD to work on as part of the Community Development Division.
Okay. And one other question that I have is that you, in the proposal, there is also mention of the DDD staff working on grants.
On what?
Grants.
Oh, grants, yes.
Yeah, grant funding. So could you expound on that a little bit? Well, are there any specific grants that you're looking for? How much time are they going to devote to it? What should we expect?
Yes, I don't have any of those at my fingertips right now, but what would happen is the Downtown Development Division would be assigned to work on some of those because they would now have more time and resources that they're available to make those things work as part of Community Development Department.
Do you have a specific target in terms of how much you're looking for?
I'm sorry, I don't have that right now, and we can certainly develop that for you, and I'll bring that back to you as some answers, but I don't have that at my fingertips right now.
Alderman Burgess and then Howman.
I'd just like to make a motion that we approve this as presented.
Do I have a second on that?
Second.
Seconded by Alderman Howman. Continued conversation.
I just wanted to maybe make a comment. towards Alderman Milwamboy's request about grants. I think in talking with Mr. Rasmussen, they'll be putting together goals and goals to work towards, and I would think that the perhaps grants would be part of that, and perhaps even a target amount for grants.
Yes, ma'am. One of the things that city manager had talked about was to work out a implementation plan in the next 30 days if the council approves this, and we will do that, and I'll include that as part of that implementation plan.
Alderman Sage.
Thank you. So let me start off by saying I want to publicly thank Tricia because and Tricia knows that every occasion I have to interact with her, I always thank her for everything that she does. And I even had a chance to just briefly chat with her before the meeting tonight to say, you know, Tricia, I'm going to ask some questions, I'm going to say some things that please don't interpret that as not having anything but the utmost respect for you. So thanks for all you do, because that is seen by all. So in a minute, I'll be voting against this proposal. And I recognize I'll probably be in a minority, but I want to reiterate something that we talked about in the work session, and that is this idea that what I was suggesting, and quite honestly, staff validated that they hadn't looked at this, and that's okay, was this idea of perhaps we take some of the current workload off the DBA staff, what I characterized as some of the back office activities that they have to perform now around budgeting, insurance, payroll, some of those other things. Perhaps have the city take that on as a proof of concept or a pilot exercise, if possible, that would then free up capacity for the DBA staff to work on some of these future projects or some of these current projects that seem to be sitting there without appropriate resource and availability of staff to help. I do think that is a tangible step forward. I don't want it suggested that I'm not interested in trying to move downtown forward. That's not the case. I see this as just a different way to do that. That along with another comment that was suggested during the work session, that when we make these mid-year budget amendment adjustments, I'm always concerned about the practice of that, and I think that was worth noting. And again, I'll say again something that we've talked about, and I know we're not losing sight of it, but I'm sensing that things will continue to start to get critical mass around this, around the reality. Not the forecast, not the estimation, the reality of a coming multi-million-dollar structural deficit within the city, and that when we talk about the need, as we did earlier here, which is the Coliseum, where we're going to move approximately $370,000, I think, out of the general fund to cover that. We need to do that, absolutely. There will be a partial, if this is approved, a partial budget amendment. And then right on the heels of that, then, as I would understand it, an additional approximately $250,000 of a year to fund the DDD going forward. These are all things that continue to suggest a really harsh reality and some coming really hard decisions for us to make. So what I'm trying to do is to balance those aspects as well as trying to create some opportunities for the downtown to move forward. So just wanted to share that explanation. Appreciate that, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. Alderman Hammond?
Thanks. And I appreciate the ideas that were brought up, the suggestions that some of my fellow aldermen had during the special session earlier. But I feel we need to move forward on this. We have 85 to 90% of the information we need, I believe, to make a decision. And I believe the information that we've been presented is valid. Also believe that thriving downtown will help our economy and our economic growth, and I'll be voting in favor of the motion.
Okay, thank you. I think we're ready to vote.
Actually, can I say something?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Last minute thing here. So for me, I still have a few questions about this, as you noted, and not right now. I'm just saying that I had. Right.
Always ready.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so and I think some of the questions that I asked, as far as the answers that I got, tell me that this is not 100% ready. And I think we do need to explore a little bit more, in my opinion. I certainly appreciate the perspective that was provided by a number of people up here during comment. They gave me a good sense of the history of the downtown and how much those individuals poured themselves into the downtown and to the point where I think where property was some of the property, could have been dilapidated, or we're seeing, less tax revenue from those properties, but those individuals made a pretty significant investment in that property. And so as much as I'd like to be supportive, but I'm a little hesitant, when I ask questions, and I don't feel like we've had answers, and it feels like we haven't necessarily explored everything. And I want to say this respectfully, but it feels like we came up with a solution and we just went for it, rather than looking at what are all the other possibilities. So from my perspective, if we had an opportunity to explore all those possibilities, we could possibly come up with a better proposal. But I do not disagree, with others on the council. I think we, as much as, the property owners there have made an investment, we also need to show that the city believes in the downtown. But I think we need to fine tune this a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I think we are ready to vote now. Five votes. And I want to make sure everybody that is here has voted. And the motion passes 5-2. There are 2 nays to announce.
Alderman Sage, Alderman Malumway.
Thank you. And could we bring our missing alderman back in? And so, Steve, I imagine we'll be hearing more details about the move to develop the Downtown Development Division.
Yes, ma'am. We'll get a implementation plan back to us in 30 days.
Thank you very much. Now we move to the, just for the both of you, yes, it passed 5-2. We move to the funding for Hamilton Road.
Mayor Pro Tem, I'll defer to Jim Karst, Public Works Director, to just briefly present this proposed resolution and why we're bringing it to you tonight for hopefully your consideration and passage. Jim?
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council. I feel like this is a broken record with Hamilton Road. We've been here multiple times before you, and we're thankful to be here again, hopefully tonight to continue the ball moving forward that many times in the past. Well, the ball began in 1990s. You can see, as we've shown before you, we think these are some great graphics to show the investment that the city has already made. In this new century, you can continue to see additional investments by our council in a southern east-west arterial road that really has some additional benefits that we'll talk about. The funding for this to this point is $36.3 million we spent on this road. There's one section that is left to remain, and that's what we're trying to move forward with tonight. We'll tell you a little bit about some excellent news of funding that we've shared with you before, but the good thing to remind ourselves of is why we're doing this. It's not just about the traffic flow. We also have a dangerous intersection, difficult, dangerous at Rhodes Lane. Anybody who travels that realizes the hardships of trying to make a left turn on Rhodes Lane onto Route 150. It is a very challenging road. We talk about the potential for jobs. This fits right into our comprehensive plan. It is a direct fit. It is called a great improvement to it. This opens up different economic development in this area. It is a Tier 2 area, but it does improve our ability to be able to serve this area. Next, this isn't just an area for cars. Right now, we have a great Constitution Trail that dead ends at Bunn Street. There's no way to really convey. You've got a long-term investment along Constitution Trail that goes nowhere. And this continues that for both bicycles and pedestrians to be able to connect that up with existing from the west to the east. And another is bus routes. Whenever you talk about bus routes, south of Lincoln, there are no east-west bus routes currently. They cannot traverse that intersection of Rhodes Lane onto Route 150. So by continuing this and improving this, we're hoping that then that bus will open up some bus routes in the future as they look to expand and open their markets. Why are we not looking at an overpass or an underpass? Why has staff recommended an at-grade? Well, honestly, money. When you're talking about $10 million additional at least worth of money, that's a lot of funds we're trying to save. In the past, we have not thought we could get this done. Thankfully, this is one of the first times since I've been at the city in 2000. We've made a shot at this. When I first got here in 2000, 2008, we made another shot at Hamilton Road to try to get this built. This is the third time we're trying to get this through the railroad, and this time there is a partnership. There's an openness for us to have an at-grade if we look at additional closings of 2 crossings that we can look at moving forward. There's some flexibility with that. But we do have, they're estimating about 15,000 vehicles a day once this opens up. That does improve things along Veterans Parkway. And again, for people who live along the southern part and the western part of the community, the southwestern part of this community, this helps them to be able to get to some major places where they want to go. There is a timeline we have, a project timeline. We can get this underway in the 2020 timeframe and have it completed even at the end of 2021. Some of the things that are some new information that is a really positive thing is we now have secured 80% federal funding for the majority of the project. That's a game changer. You as a council know you've approved us going for grants for fast lane. We've gone for basically every type of grant that we possibly could qualify for. We've tried multiple years and we have not been able to secure very difficult grant funding. Well, finally, through the federal aid urban funding through our metropolitan organization, McLean County Regional Planning facilitates that MPO process. We've been able to secure that. It is designated in the Transportation Improvement Plan 5 years, so they are planning on that funding coming to the city of Bloomington for this project. With some caveats, we have to, as a city, be able to show we continue to be behind this project. And so whenever we talk about So whenever we talk about this project, what we're asking for tonight is for you to support a resolution. Whenever we look at the overall funding of just the road, if it's just over $10 million, 20% of that is just over $2 million. We're asking for your support for a resolution tonight. There's nothing magical about that. What that tells the railroad is then we as a staff will begin negotiations with them for this at-grade. We have to secure that. We have to get this to the Illinois Commerce Commission, so there's a partnership. If the city and the railroad mutually come together and go to the ICC and say, we're on the same page, we're working together, it'll happen. There's other times when we'll have contested petitions with the Illinois Commerce Commission. Those take longer. They're not guaranteed. They're much harder to do. We have a chance to have an uncontested Illinois Commerce petition. That is a great thing that I haven't seen in my time at the city. So what we're looking at, I don't want to undersell it though. We do have some unsure costs we have. We do know we have to relocate some side rails right now. There are multiple tracks that have to be crossed. Some of those have to be relocated. The estimate is $4 to $4.5 million. We'll be narrowing that down. So where will that funding come from? We'd be looking, city manager, we've talked about this, motor fuel tax is where we'd be having that come out of in the future, either through bonding of the motor fuel tax funds or in some way. So that doesn't preclude or prohibit our continued maintenance of the other work that we have. It doesn't hurt any of the work that we have on sewers or other work. But if this continues to be one of those major projects we as a community see the benefits of, we're asking for your continued support of it through this resolution so that we have your support to go to the railroad to continue negotiations. With that, I will point out Kurt Bilabreski is with Hanson Engineers. He's a project engineer for them, and he is our main point person. There he is. He moved on me. He was back in the back before. So he'll be presenting in just a little bit on another work that they've done. Our streets master plan is item 8E. But in this case, he also is one of the consultants that's worked on this throughout. So if there's specific questions, he's also here. The last thing I'd like to point out is this federal aid urban funding is nothing new to the city. We have used this. If you went back to that map in the beginning, many of our projects in the early 2000s have been funded with that FAU funding. So this isn't anything different than what we have done before. So with that, I'll entertain any questions that you have.
Are there questions or a motion?
I'd like to make a motion, Mayor.
Please.
And that is that I recommend the City Council pass a motion for a resolution to commit to fund a 20% local match in order to receive the 80% federal funding for the design and construction of Hamilton Road from Bund to Commerce.
Thank you. Is there a second? Sorry, I don't know. Alderman Howman? Fine. Is there any further conversation? Any questions? Okay, go ahead and vote. The resolution passes 9-0. Thank you very much, Tim. All right, now we move to item 8D, which is an ordinance regarding Eagle View South Commercial Subdivision.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. That didn't flow off my lips like it should. Council has seen this project in several forms before, a couple different iterations, and tonight's discussion is about two items. First of all, adopting an ordinance that approves the termination of the original three-party agreement from 2007, and then secondly, approving an amended preliminary plan. Now, these items need to be considered together. They're not separate. And that's why they're presented to you in a single item on the agenda. As I mentioned, the original agreement goes back to 2007. The city was one of the members of the three parties. The other two currently are RHP and RZR. RHP is requesting that the previously amended agreement be dissolved so that they can provide, instead of a public road and a public water main, a private drive and a private water service. And RZR is looking to terminate the agreement so that they can purchase a portion, the southern portion of the Eagle View South Commercial Subdivision, free of any of those original requirements. Now, this is actually important for them because this will allow RZR to gain some depth to their properties, and it makes it much more marketable, much more likely to get a high-quality development on the northeast corner of Towanda, Barnes, and
GE.
Thank you, GE Road. I just drew a blank on that. So we do have, in conjunction with that, we've got the amended preliminary plan. Several departments have looked at this. It took a lot of going back and forth, but we have something that we're very comfortable with now. So it's acceptable to staff. There was a unanimous vote in favor by the Planning Commission on July 26th in favor, and so it's coming before you tonight. Be happy to try to answer any questions other than the name of GE Road.
Are there questions or a motion? Alderman Howman.
I would move that we adopt an ordinance approving the termination of the three-party agreement pertaining to the portion of Eagle View South Commercial Subdivision and approve the amended preliminary plan entitled Revision 2 to a portion of the Eagle View South Commercial Subdivision Preliminary Plan, Bloomington, Illinois.
Thank you. Is there
Do I
a
need to
second?
say more?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Alderman Bray. Any other questions? Go ahead and start our votes. It passes 9-0. Thank you. And move to item 8E, which are our streets master plan. The presentation. on it. This is a presentation discussion only, correct, David?
Mayor and City Council, we'll introduce I'll introduce to you tonight Kurt Bilebreski. I already pointed him out to you in the crowd. He is our project engineer from Hanson. He'll be taking you through an overview of the project and trying to kind of address preliminary questions that you have. I'll let Mr. Bilebreski take it from here.
Thanks, Jim. Mayor Pro Temp, Alderman, Manager Hales, thanks for giving us the opportunity to come tonight and talk about some of this work. I'll try to keep it a little short so we can save most of the time for discussion at the end. But I want to hit some of the highlights of some of the things that we've done over the time here. So let me see here. Forgive me for trying to figure out how to use this. All right, so just to start out, what I wanted to do is go through a little bit of the history, talk about some of the public input that we received. It started off with Public Works staff at the very beginning of the project. That was really to gauge like just a smattering of projects that they hear from constituents, from council or aldermen, and just everyone in general of what does the city need, where do we need better transportation, whether that's pedestrians, bicycles, vehicles, where do we have some freight moving, where we're going to have some businesses, what does the land use look like. We took a list of about 20 projects plus or minus to a public meeting at that point and asked for more input from constituents. The idea being that the taxpayer uses the system, the taxpayer knows where the problems are at, the taxpayer has an idea as to where it needs to be narrowed, where we need bicycles, where we need pedestrians, where also do we need to expand or maybe connect some different parts of the city. From that point, we put in a public survey. We handed out copies there at that meeting. We also engaged them online to say keep giving us input, keep giving us feedback as to, as you see things as we go. What we came up with, we were hoping for a list of 20 to 25 projects. We actually came up with a list of about 27, I think it was. I think at one point we had 28, but it ended up being a list of 27 different projects, I believe. Some of them, they kind of varied, across the board. But the idea from that point was we brought that list of projects back to the city council and said, hey, this is what the folks are saying. This is what we're seeing on the system. Just us using some input also to say, this is what you already have in your capital improvements plan. These are some of the things we're looking at. So we made a presentation to the city council, and those projects, that list of projects was approved, and so we moved on to the next step. Which the next step is really prioritizing based on importance. And really this is a paradigm shift from the way that engineers traditionally do things. Jim could probably attest to this. But traditionally we see a roadway or we see something and it's degrading and it's got potholes and cracking and things like that, and we think that we have to fix it. Well, given current funding levels and things, what prioritizing based on importance essentially means is what we want to try to provide some big data type results to folks through the use of benefit cost ratios that provide safe and efficient transportation, but also ensure safe and efficient transportation. So that's the biggest thing. So what we're trying to do is really figure out what roads, what bridges have the most effect on safe and efficient transportation. I like to use the analogy of when your house when your house has maybe a leaky roof or the windows are kind of old, you need to replace them. What do you do? Well, you have two major things that you have to do at once. The idea, and for me, if I've got a leaky roof, I'm fixing my roof before I go and keep my windows keep the cold air in the winter from blowing in my windows. So that's kind of the idea there, is we need to start thinking about this, especially as funds are so limited. So what we do is we sign a value, and these are values accepted by the Federal Highway Department, by the Illinois Department of Transportation, for basically the benefit of avoiding adverse travel. So that means, putting in new roads or keeping certain roads open from closure, and then also preventing crashes. In the meantime, we consider full life cycle costs. What I mean by that is the city has collected extensive data on pavement condition indexes and other things. So we kind of input that in and kind of figure out a schedule for doing maintenance. So what this does is it allows us to figure out what the total cost of a project is over a certain number of years. And in this case, we use a 50-year life cycle, assuming that basically whatever year that we start at is when we are. And so we know where we're at in the life of that pavement or that road. So some of the benefits for prioritizing by importance is what it really does is it really shows you some real important and critical type projects, things that we want to make sure that we maintain, that we keep open, that we need for the economic expansion of the city. So you consider things like the Tier 1 and Tier 2 economic zones. And also what it does is it allows engineering staff, planners, to communicate with aldermen and say, if you look at this economically, as far as the benefit to the taxpayer, to the societal benefits, this is the benefit cost ratio that this project has. Now, keep in mind that these aren't necessarily 100% numbers. The economic expansion numbers that would happen if you put in a new roadway, for instance, with Hamilton Road, there's a lot of ground surrounding it that goes undeveloped that we just talked about, that was shown on Jim's map. So the additional tax revenues and things that come off of that aren't necessarily in that number. This is just purely from a safe and efficient transportation perspective. So this goes through a little bit of just the qualitative and quantitative. So looking at it in terms of quantitatively, there's a dollar amount that the Illinois Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration put to prevent the cost of preventing crashes. So essentially, if there's more of an injury to a crash, it actually it costs a little bit more to the economy and to the public sector for having to deal with that. Of course, I talked about the benefit of preventing adverse travel and the life cycle costs already. So then on the qualitative side, we have the land uses and the taxes and things generated that I mentioned. But the other part of that is that we really wanted to take into account, and this doesn't necessarily reflect always on the quantitative side, because when you do things like life cycle costs, these are budgetary numbers. So we want to make sure that we're including maybe a little bit extra here and there to be able to make sure that we're not coming up short later on as we start looking and considering about, what were the 2016 costs. So we want to make sure we're coordinating with the sidewalk plan and the bicycle plan to make sure that, roads are being narrowed where necessary to promote that extra bit. Or also the fact that, sidewalks are being installed to create connectivity from one spot to another. And then lastly, the stakeholder input that we receive, being from the city council and from the general public. So the types of projects, we look at maintenance projects, whether it's overlaying, mill and fill, surface treatments, pavement preservation, all that goes into the life cycle costs, and all of it actually, is considered as a part of this. The city staff's gone through a lot of effort to try to do pavement preservation to keep those long-term costs down, so we want to make sure those projects are actually in here and can be considered on this benefit cost scale as we go. Spot intersection improvements, that could be adding a traffic signal, it could be road dieting or widening. Road dieting, for those that aren't aware, is maybe taking a 4-lane road to a 3-lane road, or a 5-lane road to a 3-lane road, or putting, parking or things on it. Reconstruction is, when a road, we talk about life cycles, so we're talking over a 50-year life cycle. So at some point, the concrete, the asphalt, everything underlying goes bad, and we have to start over. That's just what happens. The materials degrade. So, we're doing those things. We're taking advantage of doing road diets or widening or bridge projects in order to do that reconstruction. And lastly, new alignment type projects. Those are just new to the system. Are we promoting infill, or are we promoting urban sprawl type projects? And so those are, some of the comparisons. We look at all this on the adverse travel side using a travel demand model that take into account those new alignments. So basically it takes a 2035 land use model that the Regional Planning Commission that Jim spoke of earlier provided to the city, and we build a travel demand model for the city so that every time we put in a new project, we can see how it changes travel patterns within the whole town. That actually comes into play on projects like Hamilton Road. So that's the numbers that Jim provided for the average daily traffic and those things that comes out of that, because this model replicates how things change. So some of the 4 real big bullet points to hit here is that maintenance and intersections should be prioritized over system expansion. Basically, what that means is we need to ensure that we take care of what we have before we start building new. So that needs to take place. On the west side of town, there's a big need for a north-south arterial street. So we kind of looked at the Euclid-Brown intersection versus the Martin Luther King extension, and Euclid-Brown's is a better solution. It's way more cost-effective than the Martin Luther King extension. The next bullet is that there's not a ton of east-west connectivity in town. So, and the travel demand model shows that it's a little hard to go from one side of town to the other a lot of times without hitting a lot of traffic signals or a lot of impedance. So making sure that we maintain and improve both from a vehicular and a bicycle and pedestrian standpoint, Seminary Avenue, Emerson Street, and Washington Street. We need to make sure that those stay. And then lastly, don't take the benefit cost ratios as like gospel truth to what they are. What the intent of those is to make sure that we're saying that these are the different groups that they belong in that we should be considering. So basically, if you see a green or a red or a yellow or an orange, those are the groups that are basically pretty similar, and that we could consider all those in accordance, as together. As if I had $1 million, where would I spend that money? Let's look inside that orange group and see what else is going on with the city, whether it's, we're going to have a sewer reconstruction anyway, so maybe we should go ahead and improve that street, those kinds of things. So with that, here's a list of all the projects that we were provided through the public input of things that staff, constituents, and the council told us were things that should be considered. So I put together a table here with the ward, the economic tier, and then the benefit cost ratio and how it kind of played out. So with that, I'll take any questions or discussion, and hope Jim can chime in as needed.
Questions or comments? Alderman Matthey.
Thank you. I think last night I sent Jim a list of, I think, like 27 questions. So thank you for starting off by addressing some of those right off the bat. I think that just a couple of overarching themes across the document that I don't personally necessarily agree with is there's a lot of projects that involve wider lanes, and we're already having multiple discussions over problems with speeding all over the city as it is. And every time we build a road that has wide lanes, people take advantage of it and they go as fast as they can, or at least as they think they can without attracting the attention of the police, down those roads. And in particular in Ward 1, Lincoln Street has become a significant problem, especially this summer. So there's a bunch of places in there where we call for 12-foot or even 13.5-foot lanes, and that part makes me unhappy because it seems like we're exacerbating a problem we already have. In a lot of those scenarios, I don't like to see all the additional pavement being put in to widen those lanes when we're, like you said, we're trying to figure out how to maintain what we already have. So I think that's my overarching comments around this, that I don't want us to have wider roads everywhere that are more expensive to maintain and promote a problem that we already have. It's just a couple thoughts.
So if I may, I'll kind of address some of the consideration. So part of that was because we haven't done a full design and considered the entire context of the surrounding land uses and things like that, because we were in a master planning stage. What we did is provide some lanes that provide some complete street solutions, but also meet some of the Illinois Department of Transportation's guidelines that would be required to be able to get funding. For instance, on most city streets, they would be required to be a 30-foot face-to-face in order to use, unless you get a design variance, in order to use more fuel tax funds or to use federal funds. The thought being that personally, I agree wholeheartedly with the complete street projects. That's actually one of the things that I really like doing in my career. So, and what I would say is, for a good portion of those streets, what I would recommend is considering the context, meaning what's outside the right-of-way, and then putting on things like shared bike lanes. Or using that space for parking on one side of the street, to help promote businesses and those kinds of things. Or even, frankly, taking that and narrowing, if you're not going to use, IDOT funds, narrowing the street up. We did a project in Downs here, right around here by the school, where we actually narrowed the roadway to 20 feet. In that scenario, we went through the whole design process for the county. Just to narrow that down right by the school, right through the high school and elementary school, right in that zone, and narrowed that all the way down to 20 feet because they didn't want bicycles, so we didn't want to make it wider. We wanted to slow folks down. So the number that we're providing, and we take that cross-section and we actually provide a cost and that life cycle cost So I would rather that life cycle cost and that budget number that we're providing to the council and the decision makers to set policy be a little higher, and then when Jim and his staff, they get together to do the design, they can actually, meet those needs and shrink it down to something that, just like you were saying.
Okay, thank you. One other quick question, and I threw this out to the council. I'm the geek up here. So where are you guys, or how are you guys projecting what I think will soon be a trend in self-driving vehicles? I mean, how do you see that changing things? Right now we've got cars that park themselves. We have cars that auto-adjust cruise control. Tesla has the ability you can buy an upgrade right now and have your car just drive itself. I mean, how do you see things changing from as a, road design professional? How do you see things changing around that? Because we're talking, through 2035, that's, 20
Right.
years out basically, so.
So, not to take up a ton of time, it's actually, I used to sit on a national board for the American Road and Transportation Builders, and that was where it was a policy committee on autonomous vehicles and their implementation. But I believe that at some point, the use of those vehicles is actually going to induce transportation demand, because what you're going to see is that the cost for transportation is going to go down, half or less, and you'll actually at some point just be buying mobility, whether or not we even own cars, frankly, is one of the things that is likely to happen that far out in the future. So what you'll actually see is a lot of induced demand, meaning that you have cars that will park themselves and they'll wait for you to hail a ride, basically an Uber without a driver for yourself or for a bunch of different folks, or however that would work. And you're just basically, like the old data plans on cell phones, you're buying miles or buying, hours of travel time and, through a plan that way. So I believe it's probably likely that would drive down costs on the transportation system. So you'll see more vehicles, you'll see more transportation on the system. So the needs will become far greater. And actually, the bigger part and the bigger challenge is given where we're at in the world, meaning that it gets pretty cold and we have a lot of freeze thaw. Maintenance is very important for that autonomous type driving, because you can't hit potholes, and the car needs to be able to see pavement markings, those kinds of things that need to be able to happen. So all the pavement preservation and those things that the city's already trying to do and implement going forward to take care of what we have is important to be able to allow that induced demand to happen, which would be good for commerce and other things.
Okay, thank you.
Interesting. Alderman Burgess.
Thank you. And I think that Alderman Massey had some very important points that he brought to this conversation, because we as a council have been discussing this more since you were engaged in this process and have been making additional policy statements with regard to things like complete streets and vehicular speeds. So I agree that one area that we're missing is the potential impact on speeds here in terms of widening roads and what that might look like, because as Jim has told us time and time again, we can post the speed limit all we want, but it is the road design that matters. So that's certainly something that we need to look at further. But I do appreciate that you are attempting to take a more holistic approach here in looking at planning for infrastructure needs, because this is a significant investment, and not just in the performance of these projects, but also a commitment to maintaining them in the future. And so I think that we need to continue as a council to have a conversation about how we right-size our infrastructure. How many lane miles do we want in the city? How many lane miles can we afford to maintain given our tax base? And that's probably outside of your scope, but it's part of that bigger conversation. Because you do mention things in your presentation like road diets and narrowing lanes or narrowing roadways that have been overbuilt. This particular proposal doesn't necessarily have any of those projects in it, right? There's no suggestion that
I think there was a couple where we were
road
talking
diets,
about,
but no actual removal of.
Well, I think
excess.
those would inherently require some bringing the curbs in,
Okay.
just because when you go from 4 lanes to 3, unless you put bike lanes or parking on one of the sides, you're going to basically have less pavement out there. Which actually, when you bring that up, there's many more benefits even than just to the transportation system for that. I mean, there's like you need less storm sewers because you have less hard surfaces. I mean, there's lots of different things that are important to that scenario, but like you said, that's a different topic and outside of the scope. So.
Yeah, no, and thank you for that clarification. But I think we're all very concerned about not building things we can't maintain, because we know how painful that is.
Well, and just thinking about the very first thing I said on the trends is you have to maintain what you have is the most important thing based on how the city is expected to grow and what we have already. So.
Yeah, and so one other element that I think that has not been fully explored here is the impact on residents and residential areas. So you specifically mentioned the need to improve east and west connectors, which is a point well taken. But two of those streets, Seminary and Emerson, go through primarily residential areas. So if we're talking there about widening them, for example, on Emerson, you're talking about going from 2 lanes to 3 lanes, that could have a significant resident impact. I don't know what that is in terms of, will that encroach just on the right-of-way? Will it require people to have their private property encroached upon? Again, that's outside of what you've done so far, but I think we need to continue this public engagement process to make sure residents are aware, because I did go to that December, was it 2016?
It was like 2014, I think.
2014 meeting, and at that point in time, it was so early. While there were discussions on Emerson, it hadn't yet crystallized to be 3 lanes instead of 2. So I think residents in that area will appreciate that information. Which brings me to my final point, which is, and this is a question for Jim, will this be going to our Transportation Commission for additional opportunity for public input and process?
Yes. And very simply, yes, this isn't for your passage tonight. This is just for presentation. The other facet to highlight is you'll notice there's no implementation plan as part of this. Not every one of these projects is even recommended by staff. These are just, what we did like out of this is the prioritization metrics. We like thinking outside of the box, adding some things in as far as safety benefits, economic benefits. Some of those were things that are normally not factors. So it'll allow us to be able to weigh in the future. But, you look at Emerson, and actually staff's recommendation there is a road diet to allow for bike lanes, east and west, to be able to connect up with Fairway on down to Regency to provide some of that square rectangular transportation box for our multimodal purpose areas. So it's things like that this was fine for us to be able to get our hands around it, but we don't want to make it sound as if this is the end recommendation year 1, year 2, year 3. Many of our master plans Public Works brings to you, they have that. This does not intentionally, because we don't want to make it seem as if we have to maintain our infrastructure first. And he said that's accurate. And then as things come up, as these new projects come up, how do we rank them? How do you determine where those new construction dollars go? This provides a good framework for that.
Alderman Painter. Thank you for the presentation. I can tell you've done a lot of hard work on this, and I really like the idea that we're thinking ahead. However, the council voted down the 2 traffic signals on Hershey Road, and this is the second time I've seen it presented on a master plan since it was voted down. Why?
The idea here, again, was to go through and just have basically a laundry list of projects, because this isn't going to be something that, like Jim said, there's no real implementation plan here. It's more of as a resource guide, as a point to come back, and honestly, the idea, it's important to see what those metrics are for those types of projects. That doesn't mean that the policy to not build them or construct them was bad. It just means that, hey, here's some data to show to help everybody make a more informed choice if it comes up again, or whatever else would happen going forward.
Well, can you tell me a little bit about raised intersections? Would that be just as safe as a traffic signal?
They actually serve different type functions. Raised intersections are intended to help pedestrians get through the intersection because there's no grade change basically.
Right.
But
it
slows. Yes, and there's an elementary school, correct? Mm-hmm. And actually, what it does is it slows down cars because there's a grade that you have to go up to get in. So there's actually a longer reaction time that's required for vehicles to enter the intersection. Conversely, there are some considerations for raised intersections that need to be taken. When you get on the outsides of the radiuses of the raised intersections, depending on the types of vehicles that go through there and how much turning's happening, raised intersections can actually, there's no curbs to protect folks.
Right.
So there some considerations need to be done out on the outside. So that's just some of my preliminary thoughts. And depending on the situation, you need to design things very specifically for that condition.
What about raised crosswalks?
It's very similar in there, in the concern. It depends entirely on the type of improvement. What I would suggest is that for a mid-block crossing or at a stop sign, a raised crosswalk is actually a good improvement. It should be something for a pedestrian that would give them a chance to get through and make the car stop similarly as we talked about. To interrupt onto that, the challenge with the raised crosswalk is when you have a green light condition and things, you can't really raise that crosswalk too much because bicyclists and vehicles need to go across that raised indication or that raised. So it's the old speed hump effect, and sometimes there's some studies that actually show that you have a lot of speed bumps, and it actually makes people go faster and causes more crashes in between the speed bumps in some occasions. So.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Alderman Howman, and then Sage.
Thanks, and thanks, Kurt.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of my questions have already been asked, but I guess my biggest question is, and it was alluded to before, and Alderman Matthew raised many of them, was, are we looking at how local transportation is changing? I mean, I look at millennials who don't have cars, and we're struggling to make our public transportation system really work for us, and so I'm wondering how all this emphasis on streets impacts or could impact what's going to happen. I mean, I see the changes in how we move around locally being almost like it was in the 40s when people after World War II, everybody had their own car or started getting their own car, and we lost public transportation, we lost light rail, we lost so many other things, and I see us maybe shifting back towards some of those, and I'm wondering if any of that's been taken into consideration.
Yeah. So what we did was we did a travel demand model, and so what that actually does is it works in productions and attractions. So a production would be you produce a trip at your house and you're attracted to your work, basically. So the thought being is how you go, or how many productions and attractions that are generated. We use standard formulas based on the size of the community that are published. Those types of things can be changed quite a bit as we go forward, meaning that they can go in and be edited. It's like computer code, basically, so we can go in and change how that works. So the answer is that we did consider that. We kind of matched that to what today's trend is, and you're right. There are some trends moving away from that. There's some conflicting data though as it relates to folks not owning cars, because yes, they may not own cars, but when you start talking about autonomous vehicles, just the other day I read an article, I think it was in Forbes, where Ford's investing in mobility instead of in cars, which basically means that at some point they're going to begin selling miles to people. Basically, Ford will have a car service that'll come pick you up or deliver your freight or whatever that is.
There'll be fewer cars on the road if everybody didn't.
But there would be more trips.
2, 3.
There would be more trips, so there would then be more and more. There'd be the same amount of cars, if not more. At some point, they just may be smaller or bigger or different things. So, and actually, they'll take up less space if they're not being driven by a human being. I mean, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. The challenge that we have is just on the public policy side, it needs to be more. By default, is going to have to be a little bit more reactionary. Because the technologies for things to be purchased and to be implemented into all sectors of the population may come at different speeds. So that's going to be, we need to do things like maintenance and whatnot to really be able to allow that to thrive and not pick. I heard it earlier during the question and answer, to pick winners and losers in that scenario.
And have emergency vehicles been taken into consideration in this
plan?
We did. I believe we reached out to some of the police and the fire, but we usually do that as a part of this process. But forgive me if we haven't, and we can definitely work with the city to with city staff to get some of the surveys out to police and fire to let them tell us where they see some issues or not. But we actually reached out to schools for sure because we consider the bus route. Right now folks are using Woodridge Road. And maybe they'll use Hamilton when if that gets built and those kinds of things. So,
Thanks.
you're welcome.
Alderman Hayes.
Thanks. And I want to first start by saying, Jamie, I was just a little worried when you asked about driverless vehicles, and I saw my engineer friend's eyes kind of light up here at the podium because this image of a clock face with 10 p.m. on it kind of flashed across my mind for a second there. So I appreciate the restraint that you showed. So
It's a long subject.
Yeah.
I sat through a 4-day conference in Silicon Valley a few years back on it.
I could see it in your eyes, man. You were getting about to go loose there. That was good. But no, what I wanted to say was, Jim and David, I wanted to say thanks again, because this is one of those for somebody who's a little long in the tooth around here now, right? I know what it was when I first got here in terms of the being very diligent and intentional about trying to do the planning and assembling a number of different plans and rolling those up into a CIP. And with a little bit of luck, when we get the CIP fully kind of detailed out and we get some convergence along with prioritized budgeting, I'm hopeful that finally we'll understand the full value and impact of what's been happening all these years. And Jim, I was reminded again, and David as well, all of the heavy lifting that's been done by engineering and public works, putting these plans together, right? So at the same time, when you're answering the phone and emails and text from citizens and aldermen and stuff on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour, minute-by-minute basis, we're also moving these longer range efforts forward. And again, that's a testament to staff. So wanted to again say thanks for that, because that does not happen by accident. It does not happen without commitment. So thank you.
Appreciate that.
If I can, let me make a few comments, and I just want to go to one last section on this presentation. But first and foremost, I hope you appreciated the fact that as you looked at what Hansen brought to this study and analysis is a lot of methodology that could be used in helping to come up with objective data, whether it's a benefit cost ratio, a safety ratio, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's important, because going forward, what we hopefully will continue to have the council's support for is that as we recommend future priorities for the long-range transportation plan, I think what we definitely want to start with is as much objective data as possible. And then the council ultimately can kind of take that data to help influence the final priority that you might establish. But this long-range transportation plan is a document that's out there. It has been prepared in the past. I don't know that the council has always been a party to a lot of the additions, the changes, but going forward you will, because I think that's such a critical document. And keep in mind, even this long-range transportation plan includes a lot of street reconstruction. Because as you look at a number of these streets, many of them exist today, and they're so far gone from a deteriorated standpoint, a street overlay is not going to, it's going to be wasted money. But if you're going to reconstruct it, you reconstruct it as is, that old rural, cross-section of 2-lane, or something different. And hopefully now, with a bicycle master plan and things like that, those are all being taken into account as you look at this. So keep in mind that a lot of street reconstruction, whether it be Lutz Road, where it be Lafayette Street or others, are going to benefit. But definitely when you get into reconstruction, you notice these costs are substantial. But nevertheless, we need to keep working on what's the priority, after, say, Hamilton Road and Fox Creek Road. Because what we find time and time again, if we're not planning ahead, being proactive, doing some early design work, we will lose out when there's opportunities maybe at the federal level. And if truly there is a $1 trillion infrastructure bill or program at the state level or the federal level, where they get the money is another thing. You want to have some projects ready to go. Last but not least, just want to take a few minutes. As we talk about pavement preservation, one thing that there's been a lot of activity on, in fact, I think it was just today I signed the contract for the Reclamite and other pavement preservation work we're doing. But one thing that we did ask Hanson to look at too is there more we should be doing in pavement preservation? And specifically, we wanted them to look at this issue of crack sealing. In Bloomington, there just hasn't been, for various reasons, a lot of crack sealing, as you see in many cities, or even IDOT will do crack sealing here and there to try and prevent water from infiltrating down through the concrete pavement into the subbase, et cetera, et cetera. As if you had a chance to read back there, I think it's in page 93 and beyond, that is a recommended practice, one of many, to utilize crack sealing as an additional way to preserve the asphalt pavement and extend the life, possible life, or the life cycle life of these streets. If you'll just take a few minutes and just make a few comments on that, not that we're going to resolve that tonight, but I think one thing we want come out of this master plan to at least, as we go forward, bring to you kind of that pro and con about should we, as many cities have done throughout the nation, get into crack filling, or is the status quo adequate, as we look at the pros and cons? Because we don't have the staff and the capital and the cost to do a lot of that, but it is, a technique and a process many cities have done to try and get a little bit more life in the pavement. So Kurt, just a couple of comments.
As far as that goes, I first want to note that as far as pavement preservation goes, I actually would applaud the Public Works and Engineering staff for the amount of effort that they put into the pavement preservation and all the program around. Frankly, it's more than we see a lot of communities do, so that should be well taken. And a lot of what they're doing kind of takes the place of some of that crack sealing, meaning some of the different treatments that you put on the surfaces of asphalt pavements and other things. So that should be said first and foremost. What Mr. Hales was referring to in the discussion was, we feel like that it's an engineering question, and it's not, maintenance isn't necessarily, and what procedures you do are necessarily one size fits all. So for instance, the IDOT recommends to do that practice. However, based off of people's budgets and some of the other things that they're doing, or the results that you see, is that really a good idea? And I think at the end of the day, what we really would promote exploring is, research is really a bad word, but meaning, because sometimes folks think it just is wasting money, putting together these programs that determine. But the Illinois Center for Transportation, done through the U of I and other universities, or even the IDOT, and what's in collaboration with other governments, other entities like that, or even just trial and error, trying it to see what fits for you, I think is important in those instances, because not every situation is the same. Frankly, different constituents could have different feelings about whether you're chip sealing their road. Like, don't chip seal the road in my subdivision. I don't want all that on my car. Or it makes the road bleed. So I don't necessarily believe that it's a one size fits all, but it is recommended practice. It's in there, and I think that the Public Works staff has tried to figure out a way to maybe circumvent some of those to prevent that water infiltration into the base and things. Jim, do you have anything else?
We as a staff, Public Works staff, we actually very strongly believe in pavement preservation. It's one of those issues that you can't keep doing what you've always done, and otherwise you're going to get nothing different than what you've got. So the one thing I would stress is that crack sealing is something we've looked at extensively. We actually have prepared documents. We've looked at a lot of research out there, and there can be some benefits to crack sealing if done at the right time of the year, at the right time of the pavement life. But there seems to be, even locally, even if you look at Washington Street in downtown Bloomington, actually take a look at that sometime. When we redid that micro surfacing, we did part of the street with crack sealing. The other part we did not. And there are different pilot things that we'll do that we probably should promote more. We actually are a very pilot-oriented staff. We're always looking at trying different things. We probably should be more open about all the different things we try, because we always do those to try to find the best way to be able to find over the 5-10 year period, what are the differences we're seeing. And so while we might not see something in the first year or two, we're trying to look long term. We know that we're going to be here for a while, and we want to make sure we're taking those things into account. So we are looking at those. We do know they would take additional staff and equipment, but we'd want to make sure we had that recommendation in place and make sure it was worth the money if we did it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we're drawing to a close here. Mr. City Manager, do you have any comments or?
I do not right offhand. So although, let's see, did Brendan leave?
No, he's there.
I think you've got an event coming up, Brendan. Let's see, is it Saturday? Kind of a, what's that event with what's that again? September 7th.
Right, at
Oh,
the
excuse me,
Jefferson Street
okay.
Community House,
Yeah,
right?
I just wanted to mention that, and, yeah, okay, thank you
It's
very much.
Projects with a Cop. Yeah. Policemen with hand tools.
Have nothing
They're always
else.
a lot of fun. And children, right, true, lots of kids.
Don't have anything.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I'm probably the only one who's received some questions about the Public Safety and Community Relations Board and where are we and what we're doing. 66 applications. I think we were due to turn in up to 10 selections by sort of close of business today. We've had a recommendation, a suggestion that we have some conversation as a council around the process that we would implement and how we would grow this board. And I think we'll be waiting for more information as well about sort of who has risen to the surface and what that process looks like. And I thought it made a lot of sense to do that. So maybe that might be on a work session coming up. I would be remiss if I did not give an amazing shout out for the adult tricycle riding, and the winner of the 4-person race was Mr. Jim Karch, and the last place, shockingly, was Alderman Matthey. I didn't know a tricycle could go that slow. No, it was so unfair to put, that was just such a small tricycle. It was painful. Oh, yeah, and I'm assuming that we will have our usual Labor Day parade festivities. So, okay. Pardon me? I'm back with my BHS Raiders and my book bike, but we'll get something going to make sure we have a vehicle and lots of chocolate. Okay? All right. Alderman Sage?
Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah, and Alderman Matthey, the only thing longer than his legs on that tricycle ride was the size of his heart, man, because
there you go.
I happened to see the video of that, and it was astounding, to say the least.
It brought tears to our eyes.
So just to clarify what you suggested, maybe a little, just to put a fine point on it, maybe perhaps we can consider using the September Committee of the Whole meeting to, again, given the magnitude of this, one of the things that I've seen David implement over the years is this idea of using the Committee of the Whole to really flesh out all the details around these significant decisions, gives staff time to get that feedback, make those adjustments and then come back perhaps in the next meeting or a very near meeting after that. It allows us to move forward, and we stay away from what I perceive oftentimes is sometimes some confusion when we try to do that inside of a council meeting. And so perhaps if we can do that, if there's not any concern about that, maybe that can be some feedback for staff in terms of a possible use of some time of that September committee of the whole meeting. So.
Like the idea, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to say that I think that Tricia and I have different definitions of what a monster tricycle should be. But on with the review board, I just wanted to say that I was impressed with the quality of the applications we got.
Amazing, yes, very strong.
I don't know what process the rest of you went through, but I ended up reading through most of them 3 and 4 times, trying to, narrow the pool of 66 worthy people down into getting down to 10 took a significant amount of time of multiple passes through the whole packet and trying to come up with some sort of a list. It was a lot more difficult than I expected it to be, because I was really just impressed with the quality of citizens in Bloomington in general, looking at that pool. So
yeah, it was really overwhelming in the most positive way. Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else? Motion to adjourn?
Real quick. Yes.
Sorry.
It's
Alderman
okay.
Black.
I so rarely speak during these. So what I wanted to talk about very briefly is, along Alderman Matthews' remarks, going through the Community Relations Board, all the different applicants that we received. It was probably, at least in my time frame, the most applied for board that we've seen.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And it's just so great to see people from all over the community, some people I've seen before, some people I've never met, throw their hat in the ring to be considered, and I know that that's going to be a process to go through. And I have to say, yesterday I was watching a very well-publicized event on YouTube in which, there was a local sermon about various things. And I was really disappointed to hear in that piece a lot of hate towards the LGBT community, and then specifically about how people from single-parent households will not be as successful as those who are not. And it really bugged me. And it's very rare that I hear something and it sits with me, and I feel like I need to say something. And outside of the number one question I get when I'm doing city council is, can you fix this pothole? Number 2 is, why do you do this? And I do it because I think we need to get more people involved. We need to open our doors up and really engage folks from different backgrounds, different lifestyles. And it's really hard for me to listen to some of that insidious remarks from people in the community so loud. And I just want our LGBT community to know that we want you to be involved and we want you to be here. And as for making remarks about people from single parent households, my parents are divorced. I've been elected to public office 4 times before I was 30. And I'm not saying that I'm in any way a role model, but I think it's not a good thing to be telling kids that they can't be something or do something because of the circumstances in which they were raised. So the purpose of my remarks this evening are just more to say, we want more people involved, and we're not just all talk. We've seen it with the Community Relations Board, and I was really impressed to see the number of people that have come forward, and I hope that we can't pick everybody, but that they stay involved and that we keep them involved in our community, because it's good for everybody. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Second. All in favor? Aye. All right. We are out.